One more time I see streaks on the toilet bowl, you'll be polishing it with your head, got it, scrawny? The voice of Lance Corporal Viktor Novikov, nicknamed Pump for his bulky muscles, wasn't loud. It was viscous, like swamp muck, and clung to the mind. Sergei Savchenko, whom Novikov had dubbed Scrawny from day one because of his thinness and protruding collarbones, nodded convulsively. He stood hunched over the toilet in the soldier's bathroom, scrubbing the already perfectly white porcelain for the 10th time with an old rag. The smell of chlorine had permeated his skin, his hair, his very soul. "I can't hear you," Pump drawled lazily, examining his reflection in the dim mirror above the sink. He adjusted the impeccably tightened belt on his pressed uniform. "Yes, sir, Lance Corporal," Sergei gasped, trying not to breathe. "That's more like it, and I want a pack of Winston on my bedside table by evening roll call. Blue. If you can't get it, you and Petersberger will be flying until morning." Flying, in Army slang, meant an endless series of lights-out, wake-up commands, leading to complete exhaustion. Petersberger was Pavel Smirnov, a newbie just like Sergei, who had arrived at the unit with him 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks that had stretched into an eternity. Novikov left, leaving behind a trail of cheap cologne and a ringing silence, broken only by water dripping from the faucet. Sergei straightened up. His legs were throbbing, his hands trembled from the strain. Where was he? A private, locked behind the high fence of a military unit, supposed to get a pack of cigarettes of a specific brand. The newbies didn't have any money. It was confiscated by the senior soldiers for common needs. He left the bathroom and trudged towards the barracks. The huge room, reeking of foot wraps, shoe polish, and 100 unwashed male bodies, lived its own life. Someone was dozing on the top bunk, covered head to toe with a blanket. Someone, sitting on a stool in the central aisle, was intently sewing on a fresh white collar. Undershirt. This was a sacred ritual. A crookedly sewn undershirt was a surefire way to get extra duty. Pavel Smirnov was sitting on his bed, leaning his back against the wall. His face, usually mocking, was gloomy. "Did he bless you too?" Pavel asked, not looking at Sergei. "Winston, blue," Savchenko replied, collapsing onto the neighboring stool. "What about you?" "Coffee, 3 in 1, 5 packets." Pavel gave a wry smirk. "And you know what's the funniest thing? He doesn't even like coffee. He just enjoys the process, watching us scramble." Sergei scanned the barracks. Here they were, the unwritten rules. The old-timers and almost old-timers were resting. The newbies and greenhorns were working, scrubbing floors, cleaning toilets, running errands, and all under the guise of education and establishing order. The order here was flexible, like a gymnast's spine, and was always interpreted in favor of those who had served longer. "So what are we going to do?" Sergei asked. There was no hope in his voice. "What else can we do? Look for it. We'll go begging," Pavel sighed. "We'll try to approach Ural. Maybe he'll lend us some." Ruslan Ibragimov, nicknamed Ural, was an almost old-timer, a soldier who had served for a year. He was no longer a powerless newbie, but he hadn't yet become an all-powerful old-timer. Ural was sitting in the Lenin room reading a battered book. He was laconic and seemed to exist separately from the rest of the barracks bustle. They approached, shifting from foot to foot. "Comrade Private, permission to address you?" Pavel began, using a slightly more formal tone than necessary. Ural slowly raised a heavy gaze to them. "What do you want, Eagles?" "Well, it's like this." Pavel hesitated. "Couldn't you spare a pack of cigarettes until payday? We'd pay you back." "And 5 packets of coffee," Sergei added, feeling like a complete idiot. Ibragimov silently looked at them for a few seconds. There was neither anger nor sympathy in his gaze, just fatigue. "Novikov?" he asked. Both nodded. Solve your own problems. Ural snapped and buried himself in the book again. And don't hang around here. The deputy commander will be here soon. This was the end. The way to retreat was cut off. They returned to the sleeping quarters. Failure meant flying, or pumping the bore, when several people lie on the back of someone lying in a push-up position, or cleaning the same toilet with a toothbrush. The old-timer's imagination was boundless. "Let's go to the supply room," Pavel suddenly said. "Maybe we can barter something with the quartermaster. I have a dozen extra needles. New ones." The supply room was a small world within the great army chaos. It smelled of old fabric and laundry soap. Stanislav Romanov, the eternal duty officer for the company, who had less than a month until his demobilization, was sitting at a table littered with all sorts of junk. He was an old-timer from the caste of untouchables, those who no longer interfered in anything, living in anticipation of the discharge order. "What do you need, newbies?" he asked, without looking up from carving something out of wood with a small knife. "Comrade Private," Pavel began, but Romanov interrupted him. "No, comrade, say what you want." "We need cigarettes, or coffee. Pump gave us a task." Stanislav put down the knife and looked at them. Really looked at them, not like Ural or Novikov. "Remember this, greenhorns. The army isn't about running and shooting. The army is about surviving amongst your own. Novikov doesn't want to devour you. He's training you, so you understand your place. He was the same a year ago. He was run ragged just like you are now. It's a vicious cycle of shit in the barracks. Today you're looking for cigarettes for him. In a year, guys just like you will be looking for them for you." He paused, then pulled open a desk drawer and tossed a crumpled pack of Prima cigarettes onto the table. "Here, this is all I've got. Tell Katchok you couldn't find anything else. You'll catch some flack, but not too much, for trying. And I don't have any coffee, so the guy from St. Petersburg is out of luck." Sergei took the cigarettes. His hands trembled slightly. It was a small, insignificant victory, but right now it felt like salvation. "Thank you," he whispered. "You're welcome." Romanov waved his hand dismissively. "Go before anyone sees you. And remember, the main thing here is not to break in the first 6 months. Just ride it out. Become just like them, or remain a human being. But the latter is much more difficult." They left the storage room. Relief and a new, cold anguish were mixed in Sergei's chest. He looked at Pavel. He understood everything. "Guess I'm grounded," the guy from St. Petersburg stated cheerlessly. In the evening, before roll call, Sergei approached Novikov's bedside table and placed the pack of Prima cigarettes on it. Katchok was just returning from the washroom, flushed and pleased. He saw the cigarettes, picked up the pack, and turned it over in his hands. "What's this?" he asked in that same viscous voice. "All we could find, Comrade Junior Sergeant," Sergei reported, standing at attention. Novikov looked at him, then at Pavel, who was standing by his bunk. He grunted quietly, opened the pack, took out a cigarette, and stuck it in his pocket. Then, with unexpected force, he crushed the pack in his fist and threw the crumpled paper and tobacco in Sergei's face. "I asked for Winston. Blue," he hissed. "This is an insult. Drop and give me push-ups, both of you." Sergei's heart plummeted. He and Pavel silently dropped to the floor, assuming the push-up position. The barracks froze. Everyone was watching, some with sympathy, some with indifference, some with poorly concealed glee. "For starters, 50 push-ups, for disobeying an order," Novikov said calmly, towering over them. "And for being so stupid, Smirnov, after lights out you'll be reciting the regulations, out loud, until I fall asleep." Sergei did push-ups, his nose inches from the dusty floor, trampled by hundreds of boots. He lost count after 20. His arms burned. One single thought, brought from his past, civilian life, hammered in his head. "This is illegal. This can't be happening." But reality was here, in the pain in his muscles, in the smell of dust, and in the icy voice of Junior Sergeant Novikov, who had already lost all interest in them and was discussing demobilization plans with another senior soldier. And in this pain, in this humiliation, in this absurdity, was the entire real army. Not the one in the movies, but the one in which he had to live for another year, 11 months, and 1 week. "Potatoes to peel, newbies!" The voice of Senior Sergeant Stanislav Romanov, 3 months from demobilization, was even and devoid of all emotion, like a sentence. He stood leaning against the doorframe of the mess hall entrance, lazily picking his teeth with a toothpick. In front of him, facing a mountain of raw, dirty tubers, sat 3 new recruits, Sergei Savchenko, Pavel Smirnov, and the silent, solidly built Ruslan Ibragimov. This was their first kitchen duty. The huge, echoing room smelled of bleach, stale bread, and something indefinably greasy. Dim lamps burned under the ceiling, casting yellow reflections on the tiled floor and rows of aluminum tables. "Everything has to be peeled before lunch, and I don't want to see any eyes left," Stanislav Romanov added, without removing the toothpick from his mouth. "Got it, rookies?" "Yes, sir," they answered in unison, but somewhat listlessly. Romanov grunted and left, leaving them alone with the potato mountain, which seemed to grow on its own. "Enough vitamin supply for an entire division," Pavel Smirnov muttered, turning a small, awkward knife in his hands. His slender pianist fingers, accustomed to the keys rather than a vegetable peeler, slipped clumsily on the dirty skin. "I wonder if they boil it afterwards or just throw it straight into the compote." Sergei Savchenko remained silent. He methodically peeled the skin, trying to make it as thin as possible. His back was already aching from the uncomfortable position on the low stool. The dirty water in the bucket where they threw the peelings had become thick and brown. His hands were numb from the cold and the monotonous work. He was trying not to think, just to perform the mechanical action. Take a potato, peel it, throw it into the tank with clean water. Take, peel, throw. Nearby, Ruslan Ibragimov was working just as silently, but much faster and more efficiently. His big, strong hands moved with some kind of primal confidence, and the peeled tubers flew into the tank one after another. An hour passed, then another. The potato mountain had barely decreased by 1/3. Cooks in white but far from clean hats looked into the mess hall, cast assessing glances at them, and left. The army presented itself to Sergei not with the thunder of training grounds and the glitter of parades, but with this endless, stupid, seemingly unnecessary work. There was no heroism here. There was only exhaustion and a sticky feeling of meaninglessness. "Hey, artists!" Stanislav Romanov's voice boomed again. He came up behind them, and they flinched. "Fallen asleep on the job, or what?" He scooped a handful from the tub of peeled potatoes. He carefully inspected one tuber, then another. A tiny eye darkened on one of them. "What's this?" he asked quietly. But there was more threat in that quiet than in a shout. He held the potato up to Sergei Savchenko's face. "What did I say about eyes? Or do you have a hearing problem, soldier?" "My fault, Comrade Senior Sergeant," Sergei squeezed out. "My fault," Romanov drawled. He tossed the potato back into the tub. "The whole tub goes in the trash, and start peeling again, and faster." Pavel Smirnov opened his mouth to object, but caught Ruslan Ibragimov's heavy gaze and stopped short. Dumping several buckets of peeled potatoes back into the dirty peelings was physically painful. It was a desecration of their work, of the time spent. "Now listen up, you fresh meat." Stanislav Romanov squatted down in front of them. He smelled of tobacco and some kind of barrack mustiness. "The army isn't about what's right. The army is about what's necessary. If it's necessary for the potatoes to be without eyes, then they will be without eyes. If it's necessary for the floor to shine, then you'll lick it with your tongues until it shines. The point isn't the potatoes. The point is that you learn to follow orders. Any order, even the stupidest one, got it?" They nodded silently. "Good. Everything ready in an hour, and the floor better shine." With these words, he left. They went back to work, but now there was a vicious, desperate speed in their movements. Humiliation became fuel. "He's just taunting us," Pavel Smirnov hissed, furiously digging his knife into another tuber. "A sadist." "He's a dead," Ruslan Ibragimov replied dully, not looking up from his work. "He's allowed to. They're teaching us." "Teaching us what? To hate everything in the world?" Pavel persisted. "Teaching us to endure," Ruslan said. Sergei Savchenko remained silent again. He suddenly understood that Ruslan was right. They weren't being taught to peel potatoes. They were being broken. Breaking their civilian pride, their ideas of logic and justice. They were supposed to become faceless, obedient cogs in a huge machine. And this duty, this mountain of potatoes, this dead Stanislav Romanov with his impossible demands, it was all part of the process. When they were done with the potatoes, they tackled the floor. The huge hall had to be scrubbed clean. They carried buckets of water, scrubbed the floor with brushes, pushed the dirty water towards the drain. When they thought everything was perfect, Sergei went to call Romanov. The senior sergeant entered, walked across the wet tiles, leaving dirty boot prints, and stopped in the middle of the hall. "Bad," he said. "But it's clean," Pavel Smirnov blurted out. "I said, bad," Romanov snapped. He ran his finger along the tile near the wall. A barely noticeable gray film remained on his finger. "Dirt. Wash it again." And at that moment, Sergei Savchenko understood the second part of the lesson. It wasn't just about unquestioning obedience. It was about finding a way to carry out an order, even if it seemed impossible. It wasn't just about washing the floor. It was about making the dead accept it. "Comrade Senior Sergeant, permission to speak?" Sergei said, surprising himself. Romanov looked at him in surprise. "Go ahead. Permission for us to use a different method?" "What kind of method is that?" Stanislav Romanov smirked. Sergei went to the utility room where the sacks were stored. He remembered how his grandmother in the village used to sprinkle the floor with dry sand before scrubbing it. He found a sack with some kind of dry mixture, similar to cleaning powder. "Pavel, Ruslan, get the rags. We're going to scrub it dry," he said. They scattered the powder on the floor and began furiously, all three of them, rubbing it into the tiles with old soldiers' blankets. It was hellish work. Dust hung in the air, clogging their noses and lungs. After half an hour, they were soaked with sweat and white with powder. But the floor really began to shine. Matte, without a single streak, it looked as if it had been polished. They stood, breathing heavily, and looked at the fruits of their labor. Stanislav Romanov entered the dining room again. He walked silently across the hall. His boots left no tracks. He reached the middle, slowly turned around, and looked at the exhausted, dirty recruits, then at the floor. Something resembling approval flashed in his eyes. "That's more like it," he said. "You can go." He turned and left. They left the dining room and went outside. The cold evening air after the stuffy room felt incredibly fresh. They didn't feel victorious, only a leaden weariness in their whole bodies. "So that's how it works," Pavel Smirnov said quietly, looking at the darkening sky. His usual irony had disappeared. "Yes," Sergei Savchenko replied, "exactly like that." He understood that today had been more important than a dozen lectures on tactics. The army had revealed itself to him not from the side of the regulations, but from the side of life. Cruel, illogical, yet governed by its own unwritten rules. And to survive here, you had to not only obey them, but also learn to understand and exploit them. The lesson had been learned. A whole year of such lessons still lay ahead. A fly would break its leg landing on it, Sergei Savchenko muttered, wiping the brass plaque reading "Duty Officer of the Company" for the 100th time. The belt buckle, dimly reflected in the metal polished to a mirror sheen, seemed the only bright spot in this realm of semi-darkness and regulations. Time on the stool dragged like molten tar. 2 in the morning. The company slept, producing a polyphonic chorus of snores, whistles, and mumbles. This sound, which had initially kept him awake during the first few weeks, had now become a familiar background, a sign that everything was proceeding as it should. Sergei Savchenko listened closely. A cot creaked. One, then another. From the old-timers' sleeping area, where those with only a few months left until their discharge lived, 2 shadows emerged. His heart skipped a beat. Night visits from the old-timers never boded well. The tall, wiry figure of Stanislav Romanov, a long-term soldier with a perpetually bored expression, approached the stool. Behind him, waddling from foot to foot, followed another old-timer. Romanov stared silently at Sergei, as if studying a strange insect. "What's up, freshie? Can't sleep?" His voice was quiet, laced with indolence, but it sent a chill down Sergei's spine. "Yes, Comrade Private. On duty," Sergei Savchenko reported, snapping to attention. "I know you're on duty," Stanislav Romanov waved dismissively. "I have a sweet tooth. My teeth ache." He said it as if sharing a deep secret, but Sergei Savchenko understood perfectly well. It wasn't a request. It was an order, cloaked in the guise of a lazy desire. "Negative, sir? Nothing here," he replied automatically. Stanislav Romanov gave a crooked smile. "Freshies always say negative, but then it turns out they have something. Savchenko, don't try to weasel out of it. We're being nice. Go get me... what's his name? Smirnov. Pavel Smirnov. Your skinny runt." Pavel Smirnov, a small and thin guy with perpetually frightened eyes, was the perfect target. He was afraid of his own shadow, and the old-timers exploited this shamelessly. Sergei swallowed. To go wake up his comrade to hand him over to be preyed upon was low, but disobeying Romanov was even worse. It meant the gauntlet for all the freshies for the next few weeks. "Private Smirnov is resting after duty." Sergei Savchenko tried to wriggle out of it. "I said go get him." A metallic edge rang in Stanislav Romanov's voice. He stepped right up to Sergei. He smelled of cheap cigarettes and sleep. "Or do you want your entire young guard to be polishing the runway with their tongues until it shines?" There was no choice. Sergei slowly walked deeper into the barracks, toward Pavel Smirnov's cot. He was sleeping, curled up in a ball, and looked just like a child. Sergei gently shook him by the shoulder. "Pasha, wake up. Quietly. Romanov wants you." Pavel Smirnov's eyes flew open instantly, and in them swam the familiar terror. "Why?" he whispered. "Let's go, you'll find out." They were already waiting by the stool. Stanislav Romanov gave Pavel Smirnov a disdainful look. "Listen, runt, you had a package in your locker. Your mother sent it. Candy, cookies, right?" Yes, sir," Pavel Smirnov stammered. "Only, it's all gone. Eaten." "All eaten?" Romanov feigned surprise. "We don't believe you, and we're going to check right now." "Okay, freshie." He nodded at Sergei. "Search Smirnov's locker, quickly." It was humiliation in its purest form, forcing one freshie to rummage through another's personal belongings in front of the old-timers. Sergei Savchenko opened Pavel Smirnov's locker. It was empty. A neatly folded bar of soap in a soap dish, a toothbrush, a worn book, and not a crumb of food. "Empty," Sergei said hollowly. Pavel Smirnov stared at the floor, his shoulders shaking. "I told you." "All right." Stanislav Romanov unexpectedly agreed easily. "No big deal. You'll just have to get some. There's condensed milk in the supply room with the company first sergeant. In boxes, by the far wall. Bring us 2 cans, and the matter is closed. Don't bring it." He paused meaningfully. "Then you'll be studying the regulations until reveille, in the grasshopper position, the whole intake." He turned around and just as lazily walked back to his sleeping area, throwing over his shoulder, "You have half an hour. Time's ticking." Sergei Savchenko and Pavel Smirnov remained standing in the middle of the empty runway. The situation was a dead end. The supply room was locked with a padlock, and the key was with the first sergeant, who was sleeping in his room at the end of the corridor. In addition, the duty officer was patrolling the grounds, and running into him meant a guaranteed reprimand with consequences up to and including confinement. "What are we going to do?" Pavel Smirnov's whisper sounded like the rustle of dry leaves. "We'll get caught." "Quiet!" Sergei interrupted him. He was thinking furiously. To refuse would be to put everyone at risk. To agree was to risk everything. This was the army, not drills and target practice, but these nighttime dilemmas where any choice was a losing one. At that moment, another figure emerged from around the corner of their sleeping area. It was Ruslan Ibragimov, a stocky, taciturn guy who even the old-timers avoided messing with if they could help it. He wasn't asleep. "Heard everything," he said curtly. His gaze was calm and piercing. "The lock there is flimsy. If you can pry at the shackle with something, it'll pop open." "With what?" asked Sergei Savchenko, looking at him hopefully. "A bayonet," Ruslan Ibragimov answered simply. He walked over to the weapon rack, which stood right there in the barracks. It was sealed with a mastic seal, but Ruslan Ibragimov pointed to the thin wire holding the tag. "The seal's on the wire. Unwind the wire, crack the door, don't touch the rifle, just take the bayonet. Then put everything back. If the duty officer asks, tell him you were checking the integrity." The plan was audacious and risky. Violating weapon storage rules was punished much more severely than stealing condensed milk. "Are you crazy?" stammered Pavel Smirnov. "The other option is jumping jacks until morning," Ruslan Ibragimov retorted. "I'll watch the corridor. If the officer of the day comes along, I'll whistle. Savchenko, you get the bayonet. Smirnov, you're small. You'll go to the storage room. No noise." Ruslan Ibragimov took up position by the window overlooking the corridor. His calmness had a sobering effect. Sergei, feeling his heart pounding, approached the weapon rack. His fingers trembled, but he carefully unwound the thin wire, removed the seal, opened the creaky door just enough to slip his hand in, and detached the heavy, cold bayonet from his rifle. Returning everything to its place, he tucked it into his waistband. The cold steel uncomfortably chilled his skin through his undershirt. "Go!" he nodded to Pavel Smirnov. They crept through the barracks like two cats caught doing something they shouldn't. Every creak of the floorboards echoed in their ears like a cannon shot. Pavel Smirnov walked ahead, almost blending into the shadows. Reaching the storage room, they froze. The huge padlock looked impregnable. "Give me the knife," Pavel Smirnov whispered. His fear seemed to have given way to desperate resolve. Sergei Savchenko handed him the bayonet. Pavel Smirnov, crouching down, inserted the tip of the blade into the lock's shackle and began to work it like a lever. The metal screeched softly. Seconds stretched into eternity. Sergei thought the sound could be heard throughout the entire unit. He listened intently to the silence of the corridor, waiting for the shout, "Halt! Who goes there?" or Ruslan Ibragimov's quiet whistle. Finally, There was a soft click. The lock shackle gave way and came out of the slot. Pavel Smirnov carefully removed the lock and cracked open the door. The storage room smelled of dust, dried foot wraps, and something vaguely warehouse-like. "Go," Sergei hissed. "I'll keep watch." Pavel Smirnov slipped into the dark opening. Sergei Savchenko remained outside, peering into the darkness of the corridor. He felt like a criminal, not a soldier, but a thief, risking his freedom for someone else's whim. And there was so much absurdity in that, so much that was wrong that he just wanted to sit on the floor and laugh. A minute passed, which seemed like an hour. Finally, the door cracked open, and Pavel Smirnov's hand emerged, clutching two precious blue and white cans of condensed milk. Sergei Savchenko quickly took them, stuffing them under his tunic. Pavel slipped out, and they just as quickly and silently reattached the lock. At first glance, it wasn't noticeable that it had been opened. The way back seemed easier. When they returned to the nightstand, Ruslan Ibragimov was already standing there, arms crossed. "All clear," he said briefly, and nodding, went to his cot, disappearing into the darkness as suddenly as he had appeared. Sergei Savchenko exhaled. He took out the cans. They were cold and heavy. He went to the senior privates section and quietly called out, "Private Romanov." Stanislav Romanov came out almost immediately, as if he hadn't even gone to bed. He silently took the cans from Sergei's hands, turned them over, checking them. "Good job, rookies," he said without a trace of gratitude. "You can do it if you want to. Go to sleep." "No, you," he stopped Sergei. "You stand night duty. No one canceled duty assignments. And you," he nodded to Pavel Smirnov, "you're off the hook." He turned and left, leaving them standing in the middle of the barracks. Pavel Smirnov gave Sergei a guilty, exhausted look. "Thanks, Seryoga." "Go," Sergei answered dully. He returned to his post at the nightstand. In the reflection on the brass plate, he saw a tired guy with sunken eyes. He took the rag again and began to polish the metal, even though it was already shining. But he had to do something to avoid thinking. Not thinking about how, in a couple of hours, there would be reveille, a new day, and it would all happen again, that your will, your time, and even your dignity meant nothing here, and that this, perhaps, was the main lesson that the army really taught, a lesson in submission to the absurd. Don't sleep, Savchenko. You'll freeze, and no one will be around to revive you. Ruslan Ibragimov's voice pulled Sergei from a viscous, dull stupor. He was standing on the watchtower, at post number 3, remote, and the cold was seeping into his bones. Sergei Savchenko twitched, gripping the icy metal of his rifle tighter. 2 hours in the frost turned his brain into jelly. Time flowed differently here. Sometimes it froze solid, sometimes it rushed by, devouring the minutes when you just wanted to close your eyes. "I'm not sleeping," Sergei croaked, rubbing his numb cheeks. The steam from his breath instantly turned into frost on his greatcoat collar. Ruslan Ibragimov, a grandfather who had served almost a year, grunted. He stood next to him, leaning on the railing. Unlike the newbie, Savchenko, he moved smoothly, economically, as if he had long since merged with this cold, this watchtower, and this endless night. "I know that not sleeping thing. Closed your eyes, thought about home, about your girl. And then some comrade in arms comes to visit, or an inspection, and that's it. Busted, Private Savchenko, and you'll be sweeping the runway with a crowbar until morning, instead of sleeping in the warmth." Sergei was silent. Ruslan was right. He had been thinking about home, about how Pavel Smirnov, his only friend from conscription, was sleeping in a warm bed right now. Pashka was lucky today. He was on duty in the company as a guard on the nightstand. Not exactly a cakewalk, but at least not in the piercing wind. "The main thing, newbie, is not what you're doing, but how you look, Ruslan continued his unhurried monologue. You can sleep standing up, but if the duty officer is coming, you have to look like an eagle guarding its nest. Eyes blazing, rifle at the ready, regulation memorized by heart. And what's in your head at that moment? Your mother's borscht or a naked woman? Nobody cares. That's the army. A theater. And we're the actors in it. And the better you play, the easier the service. He took a crushed, filterless cigarette from his pocket, lit it with a lighter, shielding the flame in his hands. Smoking on duty was strictly forbidden. This was another bust, far more serious than drowsiness. Sergei tensed up. Don't sweat it. Ruslan exhaled smoke. Our duty officer, Stanislav Romanov, is dead to the world. He's already seeing his discharge in his dreams. He doesn't give a damn, as long as the shifts come on time and there are no incidents. And the officers are far away. Below, beyond the perimeter of barbed wire, something crunched. Sergei instinctively raised his rifle, pointing the barrel into the darkness. His heart pounded in his throat. All the instructions from the briefing, all the shouting during training exercises, suddenly came alive in his head. Halt! Who goes there? Halt! I'll shoot. Quiet! Ruslan hissed, instantly extinguishing his cigarette against the wet plank floor. He also tensed up, but there was no panic in his movements, only the alertness of a predator. A dog, probably. A stray. They froze, listening to the night. The wind howled in their ears. The crunching repeated, somewhere to the left. Then, silence. See, Ruslan said, just as quietly after a minute. Nobody. And you were already ready to unload half a magazine into the darkness. Remember, Savchenko, your main enemy on duty is not a saboteur. There haven't been any saboteurs here since the year dot. Your enemy is your imagination. And the regulations. Because according to the regulations, you have to shout, report, fire into the air. You'll wake up the whole unit because of a freaking dog, and then they'll be the ones to skin you alive. For vigilance, yeah. In the distance, 2 points of light appeared. They crawled slowly along the road leading to the checkpoint. Well, that's not a dog. Ruslan's face became serious. A UAZ. Looks like an inspection from headquarters. Either the battalion commander or the garrison commander himself. Okay, newbie, pull yourself together. The circus is about to begin. The vehicle pulled up to the gate, and a couple of minutes later, the relief led the new guard to the neighboring post. But the UAZ didn't leave. It turned around and slowly rolled along the perimeter, right towards their watchtower. It started, Ibragimov whispered. Get ready. Do everything I tell you. The UAZ stopped right under the tower. A major, wrapped in a sheepskin coat, got out. Halt! Who goes there? Sergei shouted, trying to keep his voice from trembling. It came out loud, but somehow boyish. Inspector! Came a muffled voice from below. Halt! I'll shoot! Sergei roared the next regulation phrase. I'm halting, Eagle. Give me the password request. To me! Weapons, for inspection, Ruslan prompted in a whisper. Sergei repeated. The major lazily placed his hand on his holster. Password? Sergei shouted. Blizzard, the major replied. Response. Snowstorm. Sergei breathed a sigh of relief. Everything was correct. He looked at Ruslan. He nodded almost imperceptibly. Pass, Comrade Major. The major grunted and began to slowly, heavily climb the icy ladder. At the top, he gave them both a hard look. He smelled of tobacco and cold. Surnames? Private Ibragimov. Private Savchenko, they reported. The major approached Sergei. He took his rifle, checked that it was on safety, ran a gloved finger along the barrel. Then his gaze fell on the bayonet knife in its sheath on Sergei's belt. He silently tugged on it. The bayonet knife came out easily, almost silently. Not secured, the major stated in a matter-of-fact voice. Loose. You'll lose it. Court-martial, or you'll sell a kidney to buy a new one. You aware of that, Private Savchenko? Yes, Comrade Major, Sergei squeezed out, feeling everything inside grow cold. He had checked the fastening before going on duty. Checked it 10 times. And you, Ibragimov? The major turned to Ruslan. You're in charge here. Why isn't your rookie's equipment fitted properly? Didn't you teach him? Or don't you care? Your discharge is coming soon. You can relax. My fault, Comrade Major. I didn't keep a close enough eye, Ruslan replied calmly, without a trace of emotion. He stared straight ahead. The major stood there for another half a minute in silence, savoring the effect he'd created. I want a report from the duty officer in an hour that it's fixed, and he reports to me. I'll check, and if your Romanov is asleep, he'll be sleeping in the guardhouse. Both of you dismissed. He lumbered back down the steps, got into the UAZ, and the vehicle drove away. They were left alone. Sergei felt crushed. Because of some trivial thing, some stupid latch, he'd screwed up both himself and Ruslan, and now the duty officer was going to catch hell too. Get it now? Ruslan broke the silence. He took out another cigarette. He doesn't give a damn about your bayonet. He needed to find something wrong. He found it. He showed his power. We showed our submission. The show's over. Everyone's happy. He's gone off to find someone else to bully, and we're still standing here. Nothing's changed. He took a drag. That's the army, Savchenko. Not firing ranges and not drills, but this. Meaningless bullshit you have to learn to survive. Come on, I'll show you how to rig that latch with wire so it'll fit like a glove. It'll last your whole damn service. They returned to the guardhouse 2 hours later, frozen and exhausted. Inside it was hot and smelled of sweat, foot wraps, and cheap tea. The relief was dozing on a stool by the entrance, and in the restroom, on a made-up cot, Stanislav Romanov was waking up. He stretched languidly, hearing them enter. Well, rookies, all quiet out there? He asked, yawning. Yes, Comrade Sergeant, Ruslan answered for both of them. No incidents. Stanislav Romanov sat up on the cot, rubbing his face. Savchenko. His gaze was bleary with sleep, but commanding. Put the kettle on, and I want boiling water, not lukewarm piss. Chop, chop. Again, Savchenko, and I want the foam up to the ceiling, got it? Sergei Savchenko clenched his teeth, feeling his knees ache from standing for so long on the wet tiles. He wrung out the rag in the bucket of murky water and started scrubbing again on what he thought was already a perfectly clean section of the runway, the long barracks corridor. Beside him, silently and breathing heavily, Ruslan Ibragimov was doing the same. His broad back was tense, and his jaw muscles twitched beneath his swarthy skin. This was PKHD, Park and Economic Day, a sacred ritual that turned Saturday into a dress rehearsal for hell. Everything had to gleam, shine, and smell of bleach so strongly that even the brigade commander would have tears in his eyes. Stanislav Romanov, a senior conscript with just over a month until demobilization, stood over them with his hands in his pockets. He was idly nudging at a barely visible speck with the toe of his boot, a speck that only he seemed to see. Stanislav wasn't mean. He was tired and bored, and a bored senior conscript in the army is a far more dangerous phenomenon than a mean one. Not much foam, is there? He drawled, yawning. You guys using the laundry soap on yourselves instead of the brushes? Or are you skimping, you peons? Preserving state property? Neither Sergei nor Ruslan answered. Anything they said could be misinterpreted and prolong this ordeal indefinitely. They were past the rookie stage when they'd been forced to learn the regulations at night or do push-ups until they passed out. Now they were peons, the workforce that kept the whole barracks running. And the main job of a peon was to work silently and pretend you were incredibly busy. Pavel Smirnov emerged from the supply room, brandishing a broom like a scepter. He'd gotten the cushiest job, sweeping in the utility room. It was dry, warm, and you could always sit on a stool for 5 minutes, hidden from the watchful eye of the duty officer. "Oh, you guys still here?" he asked cheerfully. "I thought you'd already started applying the second coat of varnish." Stanislav Romanov slowly turned his head towards him. "And you, I see, are the wittiest one, Smirnov. Tired of waving that broom, are you?" "Not at all, Comrade Sergeant." Pavel instantly changed his tone, standing at attention. "Work's in full swing. Dust is flying." "In full swing, you say?" Stanislav smirked. "That's good. That means you can help your comrades. They seem to be having some trouble with foam production." Pavel's face fell. He threw a hunted glance at Sergei, who shook his head almost imperceptibly. "Don't get involved." But Pavel wasn't one to silently accept injustice, especially when it concerned him personally. "But the sergeant major told me to clean the utility room." "The sergeant major's in headquarters right now." Stanislav Romanov cut him off. "And I'm here. And I see that 2 soldiers can't handle a simple task. And a 3rd soldier is standing around being smart. That's not right. So here's what's going to happen. The 3 of you are going to throw me a foam party right here." He paused, enjoying the effect he'd created. "You'll take 3 bars of soap, you'll grate them onto the brushes, and you'll whip up some foam, thick, dense foam, so I can walk across it and my boot won't sink in. Am I making myself clear?" It was pure, unadulterated army absurdity, a pointless and merciless activity invented out of boredom. Ruslan Ibragimov straightened up, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He looked at Stanislav with a long, heavy gaze. There was no fear in his eyes, only a dull, restrained rage. "What are you staring at, Ibragimov?" Stanislav asked lazily. "Disagree with the task at hand?" Pavel Smirnov nudged Ruslan in the side, hissing, "Quiet, keep it down." Sergei Savchenko stood up from his knees. His back ached even worse. He silently picked up the bucket, poured the dirty water into the toilet, and headed for the sinks to get new bars of laundry soap. It was the only way to end this circus. Not to argue, not to freak out, but to simply do what they demanded of you, no matter how idiotic the task. Resistance only increased the entropy. That was the main law of preserving one's nerves that he had learned during his almost year of service. "Savchenko now. He's a man of action." Stanislav Romanov nodded approvingly, watching him with his eyes. "Not like some people. Take a leaf out of his book. You new guys are getting away with murder, and you still haven't figured out how things are done in the army." When Sergei returned with 3 brown bars of soap reeking of soda, Ruslan was already on his knees, furiously scrubbing his piece into a brush. Pavel was doing the same, but with such a look of suffering on his face as if he'd been forced to clean a reactor with his bare hands. They started lathering up, brush after brush, circle after circle. The water in the buckets quickly turned into a thick, white mass. They poured it onto the floor and scrubbed again, spreading the soapy waves across the tiles. The hallway, previously just clean, began to turn into a ridiculous semblance of a Turkish bath. The foam rose, bubbled, and burst with a quiet hiss. The smell of chlorine mixed with the acrid smell of laundry soap. Stanislav Romanov sat on a stool by the entrance to the barracks and watched their work with the air of a connoisseur. He didn't hurry them, didn't shout. He just watched, and that was worse than any yelling. His gaze conveyed the satisfaction of a man who had found a way to kill another half-hour of his dreary army life, while also asserting his fragile, old-timer status. "Thicker, thicker," he called out from time to time. "What are all those bubbles? I need a dense mass, like soufflé." Sergei mechanically moved the brush, looking at the soapy streaks. He wasn't thinking about Stanislav or the humiliation. He was thinking that in 6 months he would be standing in this very spot, and on their knees in front of him would be the same bewildered freshmen. And what would he say to them? Would he make them whip up foam out of boredom? The very thought made him nauseous. The system was set up in such a way that it turned yesterday's victim into today's executioner. Not evil, no, just tired and drained. At some point, Ruslan Ibragimov stopped and threw the brush into the bucket. Splashes of foam flew in all directions, some landing on Stanislav's boots. "That's it," he said dully. "Enough." Stanislav Romanov slowly stood up. His face hardened. "What did you say?" "I said, enough," Ruslan repeated, looking him straight in the eye. He wasn't shouting, but his quiet voice rang with tension. "The floor is clean. It's sparkling. What else do you want?" Pavel Smirnov froze with his mouth open. Sergei also stood still, realizing that an explosion was about to happen. A ringing silence hung in the barracks, broken only by the quiet hiss of the settling foam. Stanislav approached Ruslan until they were standing nose to nose. They were almost the same height, but the old-timer looked down on him, not physically, but in terms of status. "Ibragimov, does it seem like you want a trip to the infirmary?" he hissed. "To lie around for a week, or maybe the guardhouse, to think about the meaning of life? Have you forgotten who you are and where you are?" Sergei Savchenko stepped forward and stood between them. "We'll do it all," he said quickly, looking at Stanislav. "We're just a little tired. We'll whip it up some more now." He grabbed Ruslan by the elbow. His arm was as hard as a rock. "Ruslan, let's just finish it," he said quietly. "Just finish it and that's it. It's not much left." Ruslan Ibragimov looked at Sergei, then back at Stanislav. A storm was still raging in his eyes, but something faltered. Maybe he saw in Sergei's eyes not fear, but an endless universal weariness, the same as his own. He took a deep breath, wrenched his elbow away, and without a word went back down on his knees, picked up the brush, and began scrubbing the floor with fury. Stanislav Romanov stood there for another moment, smirked victoriously, and returned to his stool. The show went on. 15 minutes later, the entire hallway was covered with an even layer of white foam about 2 inches thick. "Well, that's better," Stanislav said with satisfaction. "You can do it when you want to. And now, wash it all away." He stood up, stretched, and without looking back, walked towards the smoking room. He had lost interest. He had gotten what he wanted. Not a clean floor, but confirmation of his power. Sergei, Pavel, and Ruslan were left alone in the middle of this soapy madness. They were silent. Then Pavel Smirnov chuckled humorlessly. "The foam party was a success," he said. "All we're missing is the cocktails." Sergei looked at Ruslan. He was squatting down, his head bowed, looking at his hands, covered in soap. "Let's go have a smoke," Sergei suggested. "This crap isn't going anywhere." They got up, skirted the foam field along the wall, and went out to the smoking room. Sergei took out a pack of cigarettes, offered one to Ruslan and Pavel. They lit up. The silence was more eloquent than any words. It was saturated with humiliation, impotent rage, and that feeling that constituted the essence of army life, the awareness of one's complete dependence on someone else's will, boredom, and bad mood. "I'll kill him someday," Ruslan Ibragimov finally said quietly, watching the glowing tip of his cigarette. "You won't," Sergei Savchenko replied, just as quietly, exhaling smoke. "Because in a month he'll go home, and in another 6 months we'll go home too. That's all there is to it. The whole army. Just gotta tough it out." "Bring the stretchers, rookies," Ruslan Ibragimov drawled lazily. picking his teeth with a matchstick. He was sitting on an overturned crate in the shade of an old garage, beyond which lay a parade ground, overgrown with weeds, serving as a dump for all sorts of junk. "That pile of bricks over there, you see it? It needs to be moved over here, to the fence." Sergei Savchenko looked at the indicated heap. Broken red brick, mixed with chunks of gray concrete and rusty rebar, was piled in a shapeless mound about 1.5 meters high. Then he looked at the spot by the fence, about 50 meters away. There was nothing there but the same sun-baked earth and nettles. "Why, Comrade Sergeant?" Pavel Smirnov, standing nearby, couldn't help asking. His voice was quiet, almost frightened. Ruslan Ibragimov slowly turned his gaze to him. The smile slid off his face. "What why, Boot? You asked a question. Maybe you want an engineering plan too, or a written order?" "No, Comrade Sergeant." Pavel Smirnov squeaked and ducked his head into his shoulders. "That's all. I want it empty here, and pretty there by lunch." "Romanov!" Ruslan Ibragimov shouted towards the supply room. "You're in charge!" Stanislav Romanov, a short-timer with less than 6 months until demobilization, emerged from the shadows. He was thin and twitchy, and his only desire seemed to be that no one bothered him, neither the senior soldiers nor the officers. Receiving an order from a senior soldier meant being responsible for it. "Understood," he said curtly, and looked at Sergei and Pavel without any enthusiasm. "Grab a stretcher and get moving, Eagles. The less we stand around, the faster we'll finish." The work began. Hard, monotonous, pointless. The stretcher, made of 2 wooden beams and a piece of canvas, dug into their shoulders. Broken bricks scratched their hands. Dust clogged their noses and crunched on their teeth. The sun beat down mercilessly, and within half an hour, Sergei Savchenko's and Pavel Smirnov's tunics were soaked with sweat. "I can't anymore," Pavel Smirnov croaked after the 10th trip, heavily lowering his end of the stretcher to the ground. He bent over, resting his hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. "Seryoga, this is insane. Just insane. Why are we doing this?" "To keep us Sergei Savchenko started, but stopped short, looking at Stanislav Romanov, who was smoking impassively on the sidelines. "To keep us busy, Pash. There shouldn't be any free time in the army. A free soldier is a criminal. You've heard it yourself." "But not to this extent!" Pavel Smirnov kicked a nearby brick in despair. "We're just moving trash from one place to another." Stanislav Romanov slowly approached them. "Hey, philosopher, the less you think, the safer you'll be. Ibragimov said to move it, so it has to be moved. If he said to bury it, we'd bury it. If he said to eat it, we'd eat it." Choking. "That's what the army is, got it? Your why doesn't matter to anyone here." He looked at the exhausted Pavel Smirnov, then at the pile of bricks, which didn't seem to have diminished at all. Something resembling sympathy flashed in his eyes for a second, but then vanished. "Okay, 5-minute break," he unexpectedly allowed. "Just make sure you can't be seen from here. Go behind the garage." This was unheard of luxury. Usually, rookies were only allowed to rest when they collapsed from exhaustion. Sergei Savchenko gratefully nodded and dragged Pavel Smirnov into the saving shade. "He's all right," Pavel exhaled, leaning his back against the hot brick wall. "He's a short timer," Sergei corrected. "He remembers what it's like. But if Ruslan Ibragimov comes back and we're sitting here, we'll both get it, and so will he. So come on, get yourself together." They worked for another 2 hours. Their arms were aching, their backs were breaking. The thoughts in Sergei Savchenko's head had turned into a viscous mess, containing only one command: lift, carry, drop. Lift, carry, drop. He stopped thinking about the meaning. He simply switched off his brain and turned into a mechanism, a brick-carrying automaton. It was the only way not to go crazy. Pavel Smirnov was silent, only occasionally gasping for air. He was already on the verge. When the last brick fell onto the new pile by the fence, both collapsed to the ground, unable to even move. The pile at the old spot had disappeared, leaving only a dusty patch behind. "It's done," Pavel Smirnov whispered. "Is it really done?" Stanislav Romanov approached the result of their labor, walked around the new pile of bricks, adjusted a loose fragment with the toe of his boot. "Not bad," he said, almost approvingly. "Just in time for lunch." And at that moment, Ruslan Ibragimov reappeared from around the corner of the garage. He walked with the unhurried, swaggering gait of a man who owns the place. Approaching the new pile, he squinted, circled it, then stepped back a few paces, assessing the composition like a connoisseur in an art gallery. Sergei Savchenko and Pavel Smirnov watched him intently from the ground. "Nah," Ruslan Ibragimov finally said, shaking his head. "Not right." Sergei froze. A chill ran through him. "What's not right, Comrade Sergeant?" Stanislav Romanov asked cautiously. "It doesn't lie right according to feng shui." Ruslan Ibragimov pointed towards the brick mountain. "See how it casts a shadow on the path? Not good. The sun should light up the path. The aesthetics are violated." He turned to the dumbfounded freshman. "In short, soldiers. I've been thinking. It looked better in the old place, more harmonious, so let's move it back. But I want everything back to the way it was by supper time, and no slacking. Romanov, you keep an eye on them." Ruslan Ibragimov turned and, whistling a tune, headed towards the barracks. Pavel Smirnov watched him go, tears or sweat running down his face. Stanislav Romanov remained silent for a long time, staring at the ground. Then he exhaled loudly and took a crumpled pack of cigarettes from his pocket. "Well, Eagles," he said wearily, not looking at them. "You heard everything." Sergei Savchenko slowly got to his feet. He felt nothing. No anger, no despair, only a ringing emptiness. He walked over to the new pile, bent down, picked up the first rough brick he saw, turned around, and carried it back to the place where just a minute ago there had been nothing. "Sharp edge, damn it! Sharp edge!" was pounding in Pavel Smirnov's temples. He viciously plunged the sharpened edge of his shovel into the snow crust, trying to level the edge of the snowdrift into a perfect geometric line. Nearby, tossing snow strictly according to regulations, 3 meters forward, no more and no less, Sergei Savchenko was grunting. His movements were deliberately slow, almost theatrical, as if he wasn't shoveling snow, but participating in an absurd ballet. "Do you think," Sergei Savchenko said through gritted teeth without turning his head, "if we make the snowdrift perfectly rectangular, the general will come and personally award us medals for taking the sharp edge?" "Shut up," Pavel Smirnov muttered, not looking up from his work. "They'll hear us. They'll send us to dry crocodiles all night again." "What's the difference?" Sergei Savchenko drawled philosophically. "Here we bring geometric order to the universe. There we give the floor a mirror shine. Great tasks, Pavel. We are titans, holding the army's cosmos on our shoulders." 10 meters away from them, Ruslan Ibragimov was furiously wielding a crowbar, breaking ice at the entrance to the barracks. Every blow was full of suppressed rage. The ice flew off in large, sharp shards. He was working like 3 men. His face was crimson with tension and anger. He hated this pointless work more than anyone. Hated the cold, the stupidity of the orders, and his own powerlessness. "Hey, newbies!" a lazy voice called from the smoking area. "Why are you digging around like sleepy flies? You're supposed to lick the parade ground clean by lunchtime, got it? Stanislav Romanov was standing on the porch, leaning casually against the railing. There was a little more than a month left until his demobilization, and he was practically levitating above the ground in an aura of his own superiority. He wasn't just smoking. He was performing a sacred rite, shaking off the ash with one precise flick of his finger. Pavel Smirnov gritted his teeth and started working faster. Sergei Savchenko just sighed melancholically and continued his ballet with the shovel, but Ruslan Ibragimov froze. He slowly straightened up, resting his hands on the handle of the crowbar. "There's enough ice here for a week's work," he said dully, looking at Stanislav Romanov. "We won't break through it until spring." Stanislav Romanov smirked lazily. "The sheriff doesn't care about the Indians' problems, Ibragimov. You were told by lunchtime. So, gnaw at it with your teeth if you have to. Or are you the smartest one here? Want to teach a superior officer how to serve?" "I'm not teaching. I'm saying it's bullshit," Ruslan Ibragimov snapped. His voice was ringing. Pavel Smirnov went cold. He dropped his shovel and walked quickly towards Ruslan. "Ruslan, stop it. Let's work," he said quietly, trying to get between him and Stanislav Romanov. "We'll catch a violation now, and the whole platoon will be held accountable." "I don't give a damn," Ruslan Ibragimov roared, pushing him away with his shoulder. "How much longer are we going to swallow this crap? Are we soldiers or slaves? Why should we be doing this bullshit while he stands there smoking a cigarette?" The tension became almost palpable. Sergei Savchenko stopped pretending to work and watched them with anxiety. The other soldiers working nearby also froze. Stanislav Romanov slowly stubbed out his cigarette on the railing and walked slowly, swaggering towards them. He didn't raise his voice. His strength was not in shouting, but in the calm, icy threat, honed over a year and a half of service. "What did you say, soldier?" He stopped a step away from Ruslan Ibragimov. The difference in height was small, but Stanislav Romanov looked down. "You, newbie, mumbled something about crap? You, who haven't even smelled gunpowder, only your stinky foot wraps? Have you forgotten who you are and where you are? I remember. I'm Ruslan Ibragimov, and I'm not going to follow idiotic orders." He spat in his face. Pavel Smirnov grabbed Ruslan by the sleeve. "Calm down. He'll send you to the brig." Stanislav Romanov smiled crookedly, looking at Pavel Smirnov. "The brig. Smirnov, you're so naive. Why the brig? The brig is a vacation. No. If Private Ibragimov is so principled and doesn't want to work, then your entire draft will work, right now, fully equipped, with CBRN suits, until this ice melts from your sweat." He scanned the other soldiers, who immediately averted their eyes and began shoveling with renewed vigor. The fear of collective punishment was the strongest weapon in the army. "Did you understand, Ibragimov?" Stanislav Romanov stared Ruslan in the face again. "Because of your pride, everyone will be toiling, your own comrades, in gas masks, all night, and you will stand and watch. Or no, you'll be doing push-ups, until I say, enough, and I won't say that, ever." Ruslan Ibragimov was breathing heavily, his fists clenching and unclenching. He looked at Pavel Smirnov, at Sergei Savchenko's frightened face, at the other guys who were now casting angry, pleading glances at him. He was trapped. The system worked flawlessly. One rebels, everyone is punished. And suddenly, you're not a lone hero, but a selfish jerk who screwed everyone over. The seconds stretched like hours. The scraping of shovels on ice and hard snow seemed deafening. Finally, Ruslan Ibragimov exhaled with a whoosh, wrenched his arm from Pavel Smirnov's grip, picked up his crowbar from the ground, and with a swing, putting all his fury, hatred, and powerlessness into the blow, drove it into the ice. A huge chunk cracked and flew to the side. Stanislav Romanov silently watched this moment, then grunted in satisfaction, and, without saying another word, turned around and walked back to the smoking area. Victory was his. The system had won. Ruslan Ibragimov continued to break the ice without straightening up. He didn't say another word. Pavel Smirnov came over and silently stood next to him, picking up his shovel again. He felt something break in his friend, and in himself. And this abyss swallowed her in an instant. Sergei Savchenko quoted quietly, almost to himself, looking at Ruslan's hunched back. In short, everyone died. Couldn't you at least leave the classics out of this? Pavel Smirnov replied, without malice, smoothing out another edge. It's depressing enough without them. Why not? Sergei Savchenko retorted. It's very fitting. We're all in this abyss. It's just that some thrash around like Ruslan, and others, like you and me, learn to breathe underwater, or rather, pretend to learn, until the air runs out. Another bucket, Ruslan Ibragimov rasped, not looking at Sergei Savchenko. He ran the roller forcefully over the gray concrete slab of the fence, leaving a thick white stripe. The paint, thick as sour cream, immediately ran down in ugly tears. And splash some thinner in. This crap is thicker than demobilization porridge. Sergei Savchenko nodded silently and trudged toward the barrels. His legs were buzzing. His back seemed to consist not of vertebrae, but of one solid, aching nerve. For 3 days they had been painting this endless fence around the unit, a demobilization project for the departing draft, a gift to the motherland. Kilometers of dreary concrete that would turn gray again in 6 months under the rain and snow. Absurdity elevated to a ritual. Nearby, crouching down, Pavel Smirnov was methodically wiping splashes of paint off his boots with an oily rag. His face was focused and calm, as if he were assembling a complex mechanism, not dealing with a fence. "You'd be better off waving the roller around, artist," Ruslan Ibragimov grumbled, stopping to catch his breath. "We need to cover 2 more sections before sunset." "We'll manage," Pavel Smirnov replied calmly. "And I like the tools to be clean. Boots are a soldier's main tool. You'll forget, and they'll remind you on the forced march. You, most importantly, avoid drips, aesthete. Otherwise, Romanov will come and make you redo it. He doesn't need scandals before he leaves." The mention of Stanislav Romanov no longer caused the usual tension. Just a month ago, his name, spoken in a whisper, made the newbies and old-timers shrink their heads into their shoulders. Now he was just an old-timer who was counting down the last days until the order. His power had evaporated, leaving only the habit of commanding and a slight, almost touching confusion. He was already 1 foot in civilian life, his thoughts on the train, and all this army bustle concerned him only by inertia. Sergei Savchenko dragged over a bucket diluted with smelly thinner. The smell hit his nose, mixing with the smell of dust and decaying grass. He dipped his roller and stood next to Ruslan Ibragimov. They worked in silence, 4 hands, leaving behind a blindingly white, still wet wall. There was something meditative about this mechanical labor. Swing, roll, swing, roll. Thoughts evaporated, leaving only aching muscles and a white stripe slowly devouring the gray concrete. "The 100-day mark is coming up soon," Pavel Smirnov suddenly said, getting up. His boots were gleaming. "Shall we sharpen the wax?" The 100-day mark. 100 days until the order, a sacred milestone. Traditionally, the short-timers, counting down the days, were supposed to eat a piece of butter every evening. "What butter?" Ruslan Ibragimov snapped. "You can't even stomach that margarine spread they serve in the mess hall. Better to smoke a cigarette at night. 1 for everyone. 100 days. 100 cigarettes." "Unsanitary," Pavel Smirnov chuckled. "I'm sticking with the classic, with butter. And I'll keep a calendar. I'll mark off the days with a cross." Sergei Savchenko pictured it. the three of them, hiding somewhere in the drawing room, choking down that government-issue butter, looking at each other. And there was no joy in that image, just weariness. The army wouldn't let go. It wore you down until the very last day, the very last minute, squeezing you dry with its senseless parades, details, and formations. It made you hate it, but at the same time, it stitched you together with others like you, with invisible threads of shared experience. He looked at Pavel Smirnov, who was surveying the front lines with a businesslike air, and at Ruslan Ibragimov, who was furiously working the roller over a seam in the concrete panels. A year ago, they were strangers. Now, he didn't know what they were to each other. More than friends, less than brothers, comrades in arms. That said it all. Stanislav Romanov appeared from the direction of headquarters. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets, chin raised. But there was none of the old threat in his gait. He approached, glanced over their work. "Drips, Ibragimov," he said without malice, pointing to where the paint had run. "Like a newbie, for God's sake!" Ruslan Ibragimov tensed, his jaw muscles working, but he remained silent. He just gripped the roller handle tighter. 2 months ago, he would have been doing push-ups or running laps around the parade ground for a remark like that. Now, he simply remained silent. And that silence was louder than any shouting. Stanislav Romanov felt it. He coughed awkwardly and looked at Sergei Savchenko. "Savchenko, give me a cigarette." Sergei silently took a pack from his pocket and held it out. Stanislav Romanov took one, lit it with the offered lighter, and took a deep drag. "They gave us a ditch to dig for our demobilization project," he said, looking somewhere into the distance, over the fence. "From headquarters to the mess hall. Supposedly, the signalmen were going to lay cable later. They never did, and the ditch is still there, overgrown with grass. Every time I go to the mess hall, I see it. My work." He spoke softly, without his usual commander's arrogance. There was a strange nostalgia in his voice. He was looking at that ditch, but he was seeing his year of service, just as pointless and difficult. "And you guys will be looking at this fence when the new fresh meat arrive," he continued. "And you'll be thinking, there it is, my ticket home. But they won't give a damn. They'll be painting their own fence, or digging their own ditch." Stanislav Romanov finished his cigarette, dropped the butt to the ground, and ground it out with his boot. "Let's go, short-timers. Finish this before dark. I have to file a report." He turned and walked back towards the barracks. No one watched him go. His revelation hung in the air, unwanted and inappropriate. He was trying to pass on some wisdom, but they didn't want to receive it. They just wanted to finish painting this damn fence and go to sleep. "A philosopher," Pavel Smirnov finally said, breaking the silence. "He remembered his ditch, found something to be proud of." "He's just scared," Sergei Savchenko said, unexpectedly. "Out there," he nodded vaguely towards the gate. "Back to civilian life. Here, everything was clear. Who was the enemy? Who was the friend? When it was reveille, when it was lights out. But there you start all over." Ruslan Ibragimov stopped and looked at Sergei. There was none of his usual aggression in his gaze, only surprise. "You're going to feel sorry for him now?" "I'm not feeling sorry for him," Sergei Savchenko replied, going back to work. "I just understand. We'll be out there soon, too." They fell silent again, and only the scraping of the rollers against the concrete disturbed the evening quiet. The white wall grew, separating them from the rest of the world, from the future that was so close and yet so unrealistically far away. Every stroke of the roller was a step towards freedom. But for some reason, it didn't bring any joy, only weariness and a strange, cold emptiness inside. The army was almost over. But it was frightening that some part of it would remain in them forever. In the aching back, in the smell of paint, and in this silent understanding of each other without words. Savchenko, wake up. Sergei. The whisper was insistent and reeked of fear. Sergei Savchenko opened his eyes in the thick darkness of the barracks. Stanislav Romanov, a freshie from the latest draft, stood over his bunk, bent double, shaking his shoulder. The young soldier's face was as white as a sheet in the faint light of the duty lamp by the entrance. "What is it, Romanov? Lights out was 2 hours ago. Have you guys lost it, newbie?" "Trouble, Sergei." Stanislav Romanov's voice cracked. "The bayonet. I lost it." Sergei Savchenko sat up so abruptly that the springs creaked throughout the sleeping section. Several heads in neighboring sections stirred in protest. "What did you say?" he hissed, grabbing Stanislav Romanov by the lapels of his nightrobe. "Repeat that." "I came from my post, handed in my rifle, everything as it should be. But the bayonet knife is missing from its sheath. I searched everywhere along the road, the quartermaster's store, the armory. Nowhere. I probably dropped it at the post." The blood drained from Sergei Savchenko's face. To lose a bayonet knife. An incident on the scale of the whole military unit. This wasn't just getting chewed out, it was a catastrophe. It meant a total lockdown. The arrival of the Secret Service, interrogations, and, as the cherry on top, a criminal case for the culprit and guaranteed problems for all the grandfathers of his draft. Goodbye, peaceful demobilization. Less than 100 days left until he could go home. "Quiet," Sergei Savchenko growled, pushing the trembling soldier away from him. "Wake up Smirnov and Ibragimov, but quietly, so that not another soul hears. Move it." A minute later, an emergency council gathered in the smoking room, reeking of dampness and cheap tobacco. Pavel Smirnov, yawning, rubbed his sleepy eyes. He was calm as a boa constrictor, but his gaze betrayed a cold weariness. Ruslan Ibragimov, on the contrary, was as tense as a wire. His cheekbones were working furiously, and his fists clenched every other moment. Stanislav Romanov stood before them, his head bowed, ready for any punishment. "You've really done it now, Lanky," Pavel Smirnov drawled lazily, taking the last cigarette from the pack. "I told you your absent-mindedness would lead to no good. Well done. A present for all of us before demobilization." "Shut up, Pavel," Ruslan Ibragimov snapped, interrupting him. He stepped towards Stanislav Romanov and grabbed his chin, forcing him to look up. "Where? Tell me, where did you lose it, you piece of trash? Do you understand what you've done? Because of you, we're all going to get screwed over so badly that we'll be celebrating our demobilization in the stockade." "I don't know, Ruslan. Honestly. Maybe on the watchtower, when I was adjusting my belt." Stanislav Romanov stammered, barely holding back tears. "Maybe!" Ruslan Ibragimov roared, and his fist twitched, ready to punch the offender in the face. "Stop!" Sergei Savchenko grabbed his arm. "Calm down. Hitting him won't solve anything now. It'll only leave bruises, and in the morning, the political officer will ask where they came from. Use your head." Ruslan Ibragimov yanked his arm away, glaring furiously. "How else are we supposed to talk to them, huh, Savchenko? How? They had us doing squats until we were blue in the face for a cigarette butt next to the trash can. And this guy loses a weapon. We should bury him alive so the others get the message. This isn't the army. It's a kindergarten." "The kindergarten will end when the prosecutor shows up," Sergei Savchenko retorted coldly. "We have time until Reveille. That's roughly 3 hours. Here's the plan. You, Ruslan, and you, Pavel, take this eagle." He nodded at Stanislav Romanov. and go to the perimeter, quietly, like mice. You'll walk along his route from the post to the barracks. Check every centimeter, with a flashlight, but without drawing attention. If a patrol spots you, we're all screwed. I'll stay here and start a quiet search of the barracks. Maybe he dropped it here somewhere. And if we don't find it? Pavel Smirnov asked gloomily, finishing his cigarette. Then, in the morning, I'll go to the company commander myself, Sergei Savchenko said firmly. I'll report that Private Romanov lost a bayonet knife under unclear circumstances. We'll all deal with the fallout together. But this way, we'll at least have a chance they'll hush it up quietly, without the Secret Service. And if it comes out at the morning roll call, there'll be a public flogging for the whole company. Any questions? There were no questions. Ruslan Ibragimov kicked the trash can angrily and, grabbing Stanislav Romanov by the scruff of his neck, dragged him towards the exit. Pavel Smirnov reluctantly trailed behind them. Sergei Savchenko returned to the sleeping quarters. The barracks slept a heavy, fitful sleep. It smelled of foot wraps, chlorine, and unwashed bodies. He would remember that smell for the rest of his life. He knelt down by Stanislav Romanov's bunk and began to methodically, millimeter by millimeter, search his nightstand. Books, letters, soap, brush, nothing. Then he looked under the mattress. Envelopes with photographs of some girl, a dog-eared notebook with addresses. Empty. Time was running out like sand through his fingers. Sergei Savchenko checked the drying rack where Stanislav Romanov's uniform was hanging. He felt all the pockets, all the seams. Nothing. His heart was pounding somewhere in his throat. 42 days. Only 42 days until the order. He could already picture his mother's face when she met him at the train station. And now, all that could go down the drain because of one screw-up. That was the army for you. You could be the perfect soldier, pulling your weight for 2 years without a single reprimand. But at the last moment, some idiot would stumble, and you'd be the one to fall. He was almost in despair when his hand felt something hard, wedged behind the radiator right under the window. He shone the flashlight he'd stolen from the office. Between the cast iron ribs and the wall, covered in centuries of dust, it lay. The bayonet knife in its black plastic sheath. Sergei Savchenko pulled it out and sat down on the nearest stool. His legs suddenly felt like jelly. He looked at the knife. Most likely, Stanislav Romanov, returning from his post, had sat on the windowsill to smoke out the window and simply dropped it. And in a panic, he hadn't even thought to look nearby. An idiot. A lucky idiot. When the frozen and angry search party returned an hour later, he silently showed them the find. Pavel Smirnov sighed with relief and went to sleep. Ruslan Ibragimov didn't say a word. He walked up to Stanislav Romanov, who was already prepared for the worst, and looked him straight in the eye. Ruslan's gaze was heavy, like a lead slab. "You," he said quietly, but distinctly. "You owe us all. Not me. Not Savchenko. Everyone who couldn't sleep tonight because of you. Until you get discharged, you'll be ironing our collars, cleaning our boots, and running for cigarettes. And God forbid you screw up again. I won't hit you. I'll just go and tell Major Sokolov everything, and he'll make your remaining service a living hell. Do you understand me?" Stanislav Romanov nodded convulsively, unable to utter a word. Sergei Savchenko lay on his cot and stared at the ceiling, where the reflections from the headlights of passing cars danced. The crisis had passed, but there was no relief, only a dull, all-consuming weariness. He started counting the days again. 41. The army wouldn't let go. It held him in its bony embrace until the very last second, constantly reminding him that his long-awaited, Discharge was just a fragile illusion that any stupidity could shatter. And that was the most important lesson he had learned here. The needle poked dully into the cloth, and Sergei Savchenko cursed, shoving his pricked finger into his mouth. In the dim light of the storeroom's light bulb, his dress uniform, spread out on a stool, looked almost black. For the 100th time, he was adjusting the aiguillette, striving for what he considered the perfect drape. The task was meditative, almost sacred. The final ritual. What, Savchenko? Going to become a fashion designer in civilian life? Pavel Smirnov squeezed into the storeroom. He glanced disdainfully at Sergei's gold-embroidered collar. I didn't even take my dress blues out of the cover. I'm going home in civvies, so nothing reminds me. It's a memory, Sergei muttered, not looking up from his sewing. A year of my life. I want it to look good. Looking good is having a ticket in your pocket and the train not being late. And that, Pavel nodded at the uniform, is a circus, clowning around for the new recruits. Ruslan Ibragimov appeared in the doorway. He stood silently next to them, scrutinizing Sergei's work. He held his own tunic in his hands, but it looked much simpler, only fresh chevrons and badges. A year ago, Ruslan would have already been arguing with Pavel until he was hoarse, proving that a discharged soldier should look like a king. But the army had smoothed out his rough edges. Mom promised to make pies, Ruslan said quietly, as if to himself. With meat. Says she'll cook up a whole potful. First thing I'll do at the station is buy a shawarma. A real one, not that parody from the cafeteria. And I'm going to sleep, Pavel Smirnov said dreamily. Just lie down on my bed and sleep, for 2 days straight, and no one yelling, "Company, wake up!" Sergei Savchenko finished with the aiguillette and put the needle aside. He looked at his friends. So different, brought together by the absurd will of the military enlistment office. Pavel, the eternal pragmatist for whom the army was just an annoying duty to be endured. Ruslan, hot-headed, proud, who tried to fight the system until he realized it was easier to accept its rules in order to survive. And him, Sergei, trying to find meaning in everything. Do you think it was all for nothing? He asked quietly. Pavel snorted. Isn't it obvious? A year wiped out. I could have... Could have what? Ruslan interrupted him. Laying on the couch. I used to think it was all for nothing too, but now I look at the newbies, and I remember myself, what I used to be like, stubborn as a mule. The storeroom door swung open abruptly. Stanislav Romanov, their former comrade in arms, now a junior sergeant, a senior of the new draft, stood in the doorway. His gaze was stern, commanding. He now called people like them civilians, with a slight hint of contempt. What are you doing? Discharges? Nesting? There were no friendly tones in his voice, only tired authority. Got your tickets and think that's it? What do you mean, no? Pavel Smirnov snapped. The order has been read. We're free, Comrade Junior Sergeant. Stanislav Romanov grinned crookedly. He walked deeper into the storeroom, ran his finger across a dusty shelf. The company commander ordered me to tell you. The final chore for discharges hasn't been cancelled. Seen the parade ground? The curbs are chipped. Not good. Paint, brushes, from the duty officer. Everything has to be sparkling in 2 hours. Consider it your last thank you to your beloved unit. He turned and left without waiting for an answer. For a few seconds, a ringing silence hung in the storeroom. That, Ruslan hissed, clenching his fists. He was in the same foxhole as us. During exercises, was with us. Pavel corrected him. And now he's a sergeant, part of the system. Now he has to boss around the newbies and keep order. Let's go paint. The faster we start, the faster we'll finish this farce. They took buckets of whitewash and wide brushes. The spring sun was already warming, but the wind was cold, piercing. They silently squatted down near the parade ground and began to work. The strokes were uneven, staining the asphalt. "A year ago, I would have shoved this brush down his," Ruslan started to say. "And now?" Sergei Savchenko asked, without looking up. Ruslan sighed. "And now, I don't care. I just don't care. Let him choke on his order. I need to go home." They worked in silence. A company of freshmen marched past in formation. Young, with closely cropped hair and wearing baggy uniforms, they looked with envy and awe at the three short-timers squatting down, lazily painting the curb. To them, these veterans were already practically gods, people from another planet, the one called civilian life. "Look," Pavel Smirnov nodded towards the young soldiers. "We were just like them, scared, not understanding anything." "I still don't understand everything," Sergei confessed. "What's the point of all this? This year, these details, this painting of curbs. What's the meaning of it? We didn't learn how to fight. We learned how to paint grass and sweep the parade ground with a crowbar." "You don't get it," Ruslan Ibragimov said unexpectedly. He put down his brush and looked at his palms, smeared with white paint. "It's not about the curbs or the grass. Do you remember how hungry we were in the first month? All the time. How we were ready to do anything for a piece of bread, and now I can go all day without eating, and it's nothing. Remember how sleepy we were? How we stood guard and fell asleep on our feet, and now I can go 2 days without sleep, if I have to." Pavel smirked. Great skills for civilian life, working as a loader without sleep or food. "No." Sergei Savchenko shook his head. He suddenly understood everything. Ruslan's right. It's not about that. The army isn't about war. It's about you yourself. They strip you of everything, your clothes, your hairstyle, your music, your friends. They leave only what's inside, and they see what happens, whether you break or not. He looked around at the parade ground, the barracks, the gray, identical buildings. It doesn't break you. It grinds you down, like a stone on the shore. It just chips away at some, washes away the dirt, and it turns others into a cut-glass tumbler, strong, ugly, but practically unbreakable, and you can drink anything out of it. They finished painting the last curb. They stood up. Their hands and trousers were covered in whitewash. The smell of paint mingled with the smell of shoe polish and dust that had permeated them over the year. "Let's go wash up," Pavel said. "The train's in 3 hours." They walked towards the barracks, and Sergei Savchenko felt the hard rectangle of his ticket in his pocket. He didn't know what he had become in that year, a ground-down stone or a cut-glass tumbler, but he knew for sure that the guy who got off the train at this station a year ago was left somewhere back there, in the past, and a completely different person was going home. And that, perhaps, was the main, unwritten rule of army life.